Hein one, what's your emergency train? Her down, the Orca has her, it won't let go. Please send help now. It was supposed to be a perfect show, a flawless routine between a woman and the Johnsy called her friend. But what the audience didn't know was that 2 weeks earlier, the Orca lost his mate. No warning, no farewell, just silence. Andy forced him to keep performing. This wasn't a malfunction, it wasn't a mistake, it was grief, and it had teeth. In less than 7 minutes, the woman who once calmed the beast was dragged into the deep, never to Bretty again. This is not just a story about a killer whale, it's about trust, betrayal, and a creature that finally broke its Elenzabor. We begin. Please like and subscribe to the channel to follow me. I will give you for unpublished secrets. Morning sun filtered through the tinted glass of OceanBay Marine Park's backstage corridor, casting soft reflections over the wet tile floor. Monroe adjusted the zipper of her wet suit with steady hands, her breath slow. Unpracticed, this wasn't her first performance. In fact, it was her 3-1-4 throw with Kuma. But today, something felt heavier, as if the air itself held its breath. She turned to her family standing just outside the prep area, her husband Caleb cradled there, 5-year-old son Ethan on his hip. The boy waved excitedly, clutching the stuffed orca Rachel had given him on his 3rd birthday. Good luck, Mommy, he chirped. Raquel smiled, but her eyes lingered longer than usual. She crossed the short distance and pressed her forehead gently against her husband's. Stay warm, it gets windy in the front row. Then she bent down and kissed Ethan's cheek. You're my lucky charm today. The child laughed, unaware that it would be the last time would hear those words. As Rochelle turned and walked back into the staging corridor, Caleb's smile slowly faded. He watched her silhouette vanish through the double doors leading to the performance deck. There was no warning, Newman, just a quiet sense, so subtle it could be mistaken for nothing at all, that something wasn't right. Backstage, Rachel glanced through thick acrylic pane that looked into the holding pool. Kuma swam slow, deliberate teleps beneath the surface, his dorsal fin slicing through the water like a shadow. In morning, his movements were graceful, but there was a weight to them, a lethargy that hadn't been there before. She placed her hand against the glass. Hey, big guy, she whispered, let's get through today. Just you and me. No response, no spin, no whistle. Kuma merrily sank lower, vanishing into the deeper shadows of the pool. Rachel lingered a second longer before turning away to join the crew. She didn't know that Caleb was still watching from the corner, off the stands, holding Ethan close, waiting for the music to start. She didn't know it. Kuma hadn't made a single sound in 3 days, and she certainly didn't know it just 2 weeks earlier in the dim-lit back room of the veterinary. When Kuma had pressed his head against theckled metal gate, as Aurora, the only Orca had ever shared his tank, his time his voice was pulled away under sedation. She had never returned. No ceremony, no explanation, no goodbye. Rachel saw, as quiet was grief watch, mistook for calm was collapse. The show was set to begin at 11:45 a.m. sharp. She had no idea that in just 18 minutes every belief she had ever held about trust, love, and connection between species would be shattered, not in silence, but in a scream that would echo across the water. Forever, Kuma had always been different. He wasn't the fastest, nor the most obedient. Trainers whispered that he was temperamental, moody, complex, but Rachel never called him any of those things to her. He was misunderstood, an ocean-born soul, trapedine. Concrete silence. He had been taken as a calf off the coast of Iceland during the last legal roundup before international bans. Tightened witness said his cries echoed across the fjord as the pods scattered, as the nets closed around his small thrashing body. He arrived at OceanBay when Under 2,000 pounds, scared, malnourished and alone for years, he refused to engage. No eye contact, no response to cues, just slow, endless circles around the perimeter of his tank, day and night. That was until Aurora arrived. She was older, calm, scarred from her own captivity, putricilient, and for some reason she took Kuma. Trainers watched in astonishment as he followed her, mirrored her movements, even vocalized for the first time in 5 years. With her, he learned how to eat regularly again, how to respond to his, how to perform, but more importantly, he learned how to trust. And then came Rachel. Unlike others, didn't bring commands on her clipboard, she brought patience. She would sit at the edge of the tank for hours without asking for a single behavior, just watching, sometimes humming, sometimes reading aloud. Kuma would drift the surface, curious. She didn't try to touch him. She just listened, and slowly, over weeks and months, something fragile grew between them. Something earned, not Trined. 3, Rachel, Kuma, and Aurora became a trio in silent harmony. Aurora was the stabilizer. Rachel was the bridge, and Kuma, the once silent orphan, began tasing agon. But nothing in captivity as permanent. 2 weeks before the incident, Aurora began showing signs of intense. Surgery was scheduled. Rochelle was never told the details, only that it was routine. But Aurora never woke up. Her body was removed from the tank in the early morning hours. Kuma was awake watching. He thrashed for hours afterward, ramming the walls of his enclosure until blood smeared across his flank. Hair fused food. Refused sleep for days. Hair floated near the surface. Still eyes open but empty. When Rachel approached, hadn't rise. Didn't click. Didn't look. She begged for time off stage for him for morning. For space, she was denied. He's just adjusting. A supervisor said they move on. He'll move on. But Kuma didn't move. On something in him had folded inward. A silence not of obedience, but of collapse. And when the stage lights flared up again, and the crowd poured in, Rachel was told to keep things on schedule. Kuma didn't resist, not yet. Hugh wait, and when the moment came, Hugh wouldn't be silent anymore. The first quay mist was small. A delay, barely half a second, but Rachel noticed. She raised her arm at rehearsal, signaling a breach. Kuma floated still for a beat till long before obeying. The splash landed hard and cordon. Faffed. No one else said anything, but Rachel frowned. That wasn't like him, neither. Kuma later that day, she brought it up with her supervisor. He's off, she said. Plain sluggish. Disconnected. It's not fatigue or seminal. The response was a practice, said Ned, and a tight smile. It's just grief. Keep him moving. Routine helps audience love Kuma. We've got 3 sold-out weekends ahead. Rachel clenched her jaw. Bet said nothing. She'd heard this before. Performance over well-being. Spectacle over soul. But Kuma wasn't just slower. He was changing. He had started swimming tighter circles in his enclosure, repeatedly rubbing his flank against fuel. Where Aurora used to rest, hecklicked less, didn't echo Rachel's voice like he once did. The tank once fill it with their unspoken rhythm, now felt sterile, silent tone. Evening after the last guest had left, and the music had faded, Rachel sat alone by the side of the tank. She dangled her hand into the water, fingers barely breaking the surface. Kuma floated nearby, not facing her, just drifting. I know, she whispered. I miss her too. No movement, no sign. Off acknowledgements. Wanted to believe he was still in there, that the bond hadn't shattered. Beautiful. She could feel it fraying, and then came the jaw popping. At first, just on see her twice. Then daily, then aggressively. Orcas don't pop their jaws for fun. It's a warning, a signal. Of dominance, of discomfort, of unease. It's what they do before they challenge Onenatha. In the wild, Rackle logged the behavior. in the report system and flagged it with red priorities wrote in bold recommend temporary suspension from performance. Orca displaying signs of psychological distress. The next morning, the log was marked as reviewed, no action was taken instead. Kuma was slotted into a new high-profile segment, an up-close interaction called Heart of the Ocean where the trainer and Orca faced each other on a submerged platform in full view of the audience. Rachel protested, "We're pushing him too far, he's not ready, he's not okay, he trusts you." They said, "You're the only one," he responds, "Toif, anyone can pull it off, it's you." Their praise rang hollow. It wasn't about trust, it was about control, about money, about keeping the machine running. That night Rachel went home and stood in the shower longer than usual, letting the water run cold. Her son knocked on the door, asking if she was okay. She lied, and somewhere under layers of steel and glass and salt water. Kuma waited and watched and remembered. Think the worst is over. Think again, the real nightmare is just a buto. Begin, the crowd roared as the lights dimmed and music thundered. Across the amphitheater, more than 2,000 spectators, cell phones raised waiting for magic. Children bounced with excitement. Tourists in sun hats leaned forward for the splash zone and front and center. Caleb sat with Ethan on his, scanning the platform for Rachel Silhoot. At 11:45 a.m., the show began. Rachel emerged from backstage, her wetsuit catching the early afternoon sun. Announcer's voice echoed, "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be amazed by Theband. Between human and ocean, this is the heart of the ocean, a giant shadow, Mavardbana." The glassy surface then, with a thundering splash, Kuma burst from the water, his 11,000 pounds frame slicing through the air, showering the first 5 roast. Crowd erupted on the surface. It looked flawless, but Rachel saw it. Kuma's eyes didn't follow her. The way they Useto his tail's slap at the entrance was too forceful, sending a deep vibration through the platform, and when Shu whistled for a side circle, he paused barely, but enough for her to feel it. Like a tremor under her feet, still Shesmilled. The cameras were rolling. The audience cheered and her family was watching. She gave the cue for the final sequence. The close contact maneuver. A submerged platform rose slowly from Thepple. Rachel stepped onto it now, standing ankle deep, facing the water. Kuma swam toward her, smooth and silent, his massive E-head breaching just inches away. She extended her right arm, a soft practicer gesture, the signal for a gentle side glide, but Kuma didn't move, not for as a hand, not for 2. Then Heavenished slipped beneath the platform. With barely a ripple, Rachel stood still, turned her head, trying to locate him. Trainers off stage tensed. Something was wrong, and then he came up fast, not at the side at her back. The water exploded. Audience gasped. Kuma's jaws clamped down on Rachel's torso and yanked her backward into the pool with terrifying force. The microphone on her headset crackled, then cut out. A second of stunned silence passed, and then screaming. Some thought it was part of the act, others knew instantly it wasn't. Blood surfaced almost immediately, thin at first, then blooming underwater. The struggle had begun. Rachel twisted, kicked, tried to push free, but Kuma was relentless, head of deep, dragging her with him. Her body hit the wall of the tank once, twice. Emergency sirens blared. Trainers deployed. Underwater tone Polshefrexy signals meant to distract and disengage. The Orca Kuma ignored. Thems kept going. Caleb stood, now clutching Ethan tightly, his voice lost in their cows. His son screamed, "Where's mommy?" No one could answer. At 11:49 a.m., just 4 minutes after the show began, the illusion shattered. The surface stilleth. Water turned dark, and the stage, Theon built on harmony, became a tomb of silence. The pool churned like a storm, A blur of foam, blood, and shadows, Rochelle was gone from sight, dragged below by the creature she had once called her partner, her friend. In the surface only silence and red streaks remained. Caleb stood frozen in the front row, Ethan's tiny arms wrapped tight around his neck. "Mummy," the boy whispered again. But the stage no longer had answers, only the haunting echoes of Hut had just the pond. Backstage alarms screamed, a flurry of trainers rushed to their emergency stations. The pool gate slammed shut with a mechanical groan, locking down the tank to ice. Someone activated the emergency undertone emitters, piercing pulses destined to snap an orca out of aggressive behavior. Kuma didn't flinch. Underwater cameras captured what they later called prolonged possession. Rachel's limp form gripped tightly between Kuma's jaws as he dove deep into the tank, spun rapidly, then surged upwardly to drag her down again. It wasn't a feeding response, it wasn't even rage, it was ritualistic, methodic. The dive team assembled within minutes, but protocol was clear: enters while the orca is in attack mode. So they waited. At minute 2, Rachel surfaced, barely. Her face broke the water for just a second, her eyes open, her mouth gasping, before Kuma slammed her back down. At minute 3, trainers attempted a fish lure. A bucket of sardines was dumped into the medical pool, coupled with vocal commands from a secondary handler. Kuma station, Kuma, come. He didn't come. He circled the perimeter of the pool, with Rachel still in his hold, dragging her like a shadow. Some sight looked like grief, others like a punishment. Maybe it was both. At minute 4, one trainer hurled a steel decoy into the tank. A loud distraction meant toe shift. The whale's focus, Kuma slapped it aside with a single blow of his tail, and dove, again disappearing into the blue with her body still clenched in Hismuth. Minute 5. The water was almost still now, but the blood had begun to spread, thin at first, then thicker, as if tank itself were bleeding. Minute 6. Raquel hadn't surfaced in over 200 seconds. Oxygen deprivation was now certain, brain damage inevitable, death imminent. And then, minute 7, Kuma surfaced, slow, quiet. He opened his mouth, and Rachel's body floated gently to the surface like a discarded memory. Trainers rushed forward with poles and nets. Her onto the platform. Her wetsuit was shredded across the torso. Her limbs hung limp, head tilted untrily. Caleb, now behind Thurlings, fell to his knees. Ethan screamed paramedics, BEGAN CPR, chest compressions, oxygen, epinephrine, no response. 12 minutes after the attack begun, a quiet voice confirmed what Thenia Stadium already knew: time of death, 12:23 p.m. 7 minutes underwater had undone 10 years of trust. By sunset, OceanBay Marine Park was locked down, the gates were shut, upcoming shows were cancelled. Short press statement was issued, sterile and rehearsed. We are deeply saddened by the loss of one of our most experienced trainers. Rachel Monroe, our hearts are with her family and colleagues during this difficult time. There were no answers, no explanations, just silence and the soft thump of helicopters circling overhead. But outside the gates, the world was already burning. News outlets broadcasted for Degef. Rachel waving to the crowd just minutes before the attack. Clips of Kuma's breach, still images of their blood-stained water. The headlines: Where swift and merciless killer whale kills Belavage trainer. Trust broken in an instant. What did OceanBay know? Within 24 hours, protesters gathered at the main entrance holding signs that read "Justice for Rachel, shut it down, grief isn't our performance." On social media, hashtags explode "Justice for Rachel" at Frecumet OceanBay. And then came the leak. An anonymous former employee sent internal documents to multiple journalists, among them incident reports, supersedvatory logs, and a detailed file titled Aurora Operative, notes complications and loss. Aurora, the only Kuma had bonded with, in captivity, Hadid, 2 weeks before the attack. Thepablik hadn't been told, not even Rachel had been informed of the details. Thelogs confirmed Aurora's death. A corridering, a surgical procedure to remove a twisted intestine, the attempt failed. Her body was removed at night, but most damning of all was a line in an internal behavior report dated just 4 days before the show's subject. Kuma observed behavior: jaw popping, flanking walls, food refusal, Kusi psychological state, grief indicators, strong recommendation. From live performance, rotationantal, further notice status, overruled by program director. Rachel had asked, had warned, had begged, and they ignored her public opinion. Turned like a storm tide. Former trainers came forward. A marine biologist hired as a consultant revealed Shay had submitted warnings about commiserating behavior, but was said the crowd loved him too much, made money, that was all that. Matra Drakel's family shattered and Furia shelled. A press conference, her husband Caleb stood trembling beside his son. My wife trusted that whale, but more than thought she trusted the people running this place. They broke that trust, and now Myson is growing up without a mother. Tears blurred his voice. She didn't die from an accident, she died from a dissection. The next morning, federal safety officials launched an investigation. Welfare organizations filed lawsuits, lawmakers reopened dormant bills on marine captivity. The story was no longer just Rachel's. It had become a reckoning. 3 weeks later, the tank, where it all happened, stood still. No music, no cheering, no splashes. Just a vast, unnatural silence pressing against the thick acrylic walls. The grandstand sat empty under the morning sun, a place once meant for wonder, now reduced to a monument of grief beneath the surface. Kuma drifted in slow, endless circles like a ghost. For something long gone he hadn't performed since that day. OceanBay Marine Park under mounting pressure announced a sweeping overhaul. The Orca show was permanently suspended. Trainers would no longer enter, the water interactive programs were cancelled. The entire marine mammal division wouldn't go. Restructuring under the guidance of independent welfare experts to Samide was too little to promote. Late the park's once proud slogan, where ocean meets heart, had become a bitter reminder of hut had been lost. But for Rachel's family, change had to mean more than just policy. 6 months after her death, the Rachel Monroe Foundation was born. Its mission to fund marine mammal research, promote safer wildlife handling practices, and advocate for the ethical treatment of captivities. Donations poured in. Colleges launched new scholarships in her name. Former colleagues held a candlelight vigil beside the tank. They stood, insolent wetsuits, zipped heads bowed. No words were spoken, none were needed. Floating near the edge of the platform, Asmal White Lily drifted on the stills. A face, a gift from Ethan, now 6, who still asked whether Orca had taken his mother Kuma in the days that followed. Attack had changed. He irregularly refused to vote. He floated at the far end of the tank for hours, unmoving, staring at nothing. Experts debated, was it shock and fusion reams? No one could say for certain, but Rachel had once said, they feel of everything, maybe more than we do, we just don't always know how. Tolleson. And now no one was listening. Tank stayed silent, just water, concrete, and memory in Congress. Debates reignited, activists testified, lawmakers, some with tears in their eyes, introduced legislation to force out Orca captivity across the country. One Congresswoman held up a photo of Rachel mid-performance. arm outstretched, eyes glowing with joy, she believed in connection. The lawmaker saddened we betrayed that connection. At the park Caleb Brotethan once more to the viewing window. Fee didn't speak. They simply stood there side by side, watching the figure bellow drift in slow, endless motion. Kuma passed by just once, his eye catching Theboy's for the briefest of moments, then he vanished into the blue. Some say it was just instinct, others say it was recognition. But no one could deny what lingered in the silence between them, a life lost to trust, broken, and a question that would never leave the water, consummating, that feels so deeply, ever truly forgive Rachel. Monroe's story is not just about a tragic accident. It's about trust offered and broken, about grief not only in human hearts, but in the silent depths where captive John Smawn. Alone, Kuma didn't lash out for show. He responded to a world that had silenced him, ignored his sorrow, and demanded obedience. In the face often bearable loss her death sparked, Chanjite forced us to ask hard questions. Can will truly claim to care for a creature while denying it the space to grieve? Can love exist in a cage? OceanBay has shifted, policies have changed, but for Kuma and for Rachel's family, the echoes remain. Let this story be a mirror, not just for marine parks, but for all of us. Know it's your turn. Do you believe Orca spellen in captivity? Should places like OceanBay ever be allowed to operate? Tegan, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what would you have done differently that day? Because as Somates, the most powerful change begins with a conversation.